Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's AMPC webinar hosted by Jason Ollington from the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment. We thank Jason for his time today, and he, as always, will be giving the industry a very informative update. We know from the registrations that this is one of the ones that everyone looks forward to. We've got over 60 people registered today, which is fantastic. So thank you, Jason. We've also got with us today Matt O'Brien, who is the core program manager at AMPC. So if you've got any questions at the end or want to reach out after this, Matt and Jason will be more than willing to take them. During today's webinar, if you do have a question, we would encourage you to send them in. And to do that, just above your, there's a comment, a question mark on your toolbox. You can type in a question there and it will come through to us. And then at the appropriate time, Matt will be able to ask Jason the question. So thanks everyone for attending today, and I'll hand over to Matt to introduce Jason.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your attendance. It's really good to see great numbers turning out again for the important updates we get from the department. I think Jason's probably no stranger to most of you. He's been with the department for quite some time, and he's delivered the reports around the department to our network meeting for some period of time as well between himself and Sam Allen. So he's done some great work from that, and I'm sure we're going to have a really good presentation today, and I'll be interested to hear your thoughts and questions over the presentation. So Jason, it's over to you, mate.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Amanda, and thanks to AMPC for giving me the opportunity to speak on this webinar today. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for your time. Hopefully, a couple of things that I'll talk about will be relevant to you, and you'll get a little bit out of it. And as Matt and Amanda have said, more than happy to take some questions, around this at the end. So we might as well jump straight in, because like Matt said, I think I better introduce myself. So I'm a field operation manager for the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment. I've been with the department for over 20 years now, and it's pretty much exclusively in the meat export area. So I was an OPB for a while, and then an area technical manager, and then a field operation manager. Currently doing two roles. I'm also the National Veterinary Technical Manager for the department, but I will shortly cease doing that, and an announcement of my replacement in that role will be made probably in the next couple of weeks. So I'm a field operation manager. I'm based down here in Melbourne, which is the COVID capital. Well, it used to be the COVID capital of Australia, and unfortunately we look like we're heading in the right direction. So that's all good. So look, I just wanted to take this opportunity today just to spend a little bit of time talking about a couple of sort of key things that I'm assuming you guys have probably heard of. Maybe not in any great sort of detail, and I just thought it'd be beneficial to spend a little bit of time trying to give you a bit more sort of information around some of these topics. So today I'm just going to talk around meat modernisation, and so that's probably half of what I'll talk about today, and sort of touch on what that actually is, and what it sort of potentially will look like going forward, and if you're at the abattoirs and sort of boning room level, you can probably get a little bit of insight of some of the things that that potentially are going to be changing in our world over the next sort of few years. So we'll touch on that. We'll just touch on the meat notices, and one of those is Refrigeration Index. And I think on the last webinar that we did, I indicated that wasn't too far away from being published. Well, sort of 6 months later, it finally did get published, and we've got a Refrigeration Index guideline out there. But again, I just want to touch base with you guys around what that means. I'm assuming that most of you are probably already across RI and how that's to be applied, but I thought it'd be sort of a good opportunity just to touch base on that again. And I'll just finish off with some very topical, current sort of important country issues that we've had with a couple of our trading partners, just to really bring it to your attention. And again, I'm assuming that you've probably been across some of that already. So we'll get going. Meat modernisation. So what's all that about? So look, probably just a little bit of context around meat modernisation. And meat modernisation is effectively, a reform agenda that is being developed as we speak, about how we can make some significant changes to the current export meat regulatory system going forward. And I guess if we just cast our minds back quite a number of years now, I guess the last significant reform we had was around that sort of 2010, 2011 sort of period, where we undertook a lot of reform activity, primarily focused, I guess the main one was the introduction of the ability for meat inspection in export abattoirs to be conducted by authorised officers. So meat inspectors, qualified meat inspectors that were employed either directly by the abattoir themselves or provided by a third party. And there are a few other reforms that sort of took place around that, like a few changes to our audit programs and introduction of sort of data collection systems and PHI and a few others, and we changed a few post-mortem inspection procedures. So I think if we look back in that period, what the hope was that those reforms or those changes to our system would result in some real cost benefits to the industry. I guess in simplistic terms, if we transition from a government meat inspection service to one that was I guess made up of company employed meat inspectors or third party, there'd be a significant reduction in the overheads for the department, and therefore that would translate into reduced fees and charges that we have to recover out of the industry. So our cost recovery bottom line would be less, and individual establishments would be charged less. That was the ideal and the aim, and to a certain extent, we did achieve that. But I guess maybe we didn't achieve I guess possibly the full benefit of that, because what we found is that model of moving to AAOs wasn't actually sort of taken up by the entire industry, and there were various reasons why individual establishments did not see that that was the way that they wanted to go. And there was a level of concern around sort of market access issues that potentially may come out of such a big change. And there was some reluctance on I guess probably around half of our abattoirs at the time to transition. So unfortunately, what that meant was maybe some of the real cost savings that we were sort of anticipating didn't actually get realised. So a few years ago, I think the AEMIS system that we developed then was always going to be subject to ongoing review and make sure that it was delivering what it needed to deliver in terms of market access and certification. But a couple of years ago, there was a formal review done by a Palladium group, like a consultancy company, and they looked at the entire system as it was functioning in export sort of meat. And they made a number of recommendations, and I guess fundamentally, and they reported on that about, I think it was about a couple of years ago now. Fundamentally, the report said that AEMIS was working, it was fit for purpose, it was doing what it primarily had to do, and that was to provide certification for meat products going overseas that supported market access. It basically kept markets open and gave the Australian meat industry an opportunity to access those markets. But the report also found that there was, I guess, similar to what I've just said, is that like some of the benefits wasn't fully realised because there wasn't full adoption of some of the requirements at the time. So that report was given to the department, and the department considered its position on that, and the Minister of Agriculture was consulted, and I guess that in a roundabout way that sort of funneled into a bit of a discussion earlier this year, where there was a roundtable discussion held by the Minister of Agriculture, Minister Littleproud, and senior industry representatives from AMIC and JBS and TEAS, I guess, and also senior department officials. And I guess that the purpose of that roundtable is to really, I guess, for the first time, sit down all players around the table and try and develop a plan of attack about how do we bring this, the recommendations from Palladium forward. How do we actually sort of start implementing some of that, and obviously also happening at the same time was a cost recovery impact statement around the department's proposal to increase sort of fees and charges because to basically cover our costs. So all of that was sort of discussed at this roundtable. I guess one of the main outcome of that was the decision to formulate a Meat Modernisation Working Group. And that's exactly what happened. So a working group of industry and department officials, AMIC, JBS and Ts and senior executive from our export division. So all my big bosses were attending, and really what they were tasked to do by the minister was to consider the forward-leaning opportunities aimed at modernising the industry. So really to basically look at the current system and where can we actually make this better in terms of ensuring that the industry not only continues to enjoy the market access, but look at the opportunities for expanding that market access, but also looking at opportunities to really make this industry as competitive as it can be on the international stage, because we all know that Australia, whilst they're a large exporter of meat, there are some really big competitors out there that can probably put meat onto shelves and produce meat a little bit cheaper than what we can. So how do we, what are the things and activities that we could be doing to keep the industry as competitive as possible and really sort of impact on that bottom line? So one of the what that group had to do was obviously consider the recommendations coming out of the AEMIS review, and also looking at given that we're now in the 21st century and we've got so much technology that we just all take for granted, how can we capture that? How can we harness that technology and with the agenda of making the export meat regulatory system as cost efficient as we possibly can and as effective as we possibly can. So that meeting has had a number of, that group has had a number of meetings, and I guess it was a little bit of a brainstorming sort of exercise, and a list of reform proposals were developed. And in August of this year, they were presented to the minister, and so the minister sort of considered those. And in October of this year, as part of the budget announcement, there were quite a number of announcements about funding for certain activities within the agricultural sector and specifically within the export meat sector. And some of those were obviously were over $200 million for digital services to take farmers to markets. And look, in simplistic terms, that's around building really smart IT systems and then transforming the way that sort of agriculture does business from I guess a paper sort of based sort of clunky system to a digital smart sort of system. So it's not just meat; it's across the board in terms of the agricultural supply chain and all the players. And so it's fundamentally about building smart IT systems and integrating systems where possible, and really trying to achieve some streamlining of how we do business and sort of making it more competitive to get our products overseas. There was about 11 million, just under 11 million for building a competitive meat export industry, and that was primarily money to be made available to help us streamline our costs. So looking at the sort of how we all the fees and charges that we put onto the industry to recover our costs for meat inspection, certification, and auditing systems. Where can we sort of make some sort of streamlining of those costs to deliver some savings to the industry? And then the last one was just over $70 million over 3 years to basically to address that cost recovery sort of shortfall that the department's had for the last few years, and trying to work through a new fee structure. So what the government has actually done is said, look, for the next 12 months, we're just going to put a bit of a freeze on any sort of further increases. So what you're currently paying right now is what you'll continue to pay for the next 12 months, but that will then be a stepped increase over the next couple of years after that, to get to the point where we've got the full cost recovery being back in place. So it's like a transition for the industry to work through and sort of, I guess, help them plan for what those costs are going to be in the next 12 months, and then a couple of years after that. So that money was being made available. So out of that I guess that budget announcement, fundamentally what that's saying is money is now available to actually start actioning some of these sort of ideas that the working group has had. So where we're currently at the moment is that group has developed a list of sort of activities which they think will help sort of reform and streamline the system, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. We'll get into that list. Clearly, we're at the start of this reform process. So whilst the ideas that I'm going to talk about, or the projects that I'm going to talk about, are certainly ones that are currently being discussed, the actual detail about what they look like going forward is really yet to be sort of nutted out. So I just want everyone's sort of expectations to be managed a little bit around this presentation. There'll be some things that I'm talking about, but none of this is absolutely locked away yet in terms of the actual sort of nature of the projects or nature of the reforms. There's still quite a bit of water to go under the bridge yet before some of these things start seeing the light of day, so to speak. So look, just and apologise, I've got some magpies here that have just turned up for their regular feed, so you might hear a few of those in the background. Apologies. So look, just temper your expectations, or if there's things in here that you think, oh, hang on, that's a brand new world, and I'm a little bit worried about those changes. Look, there will be a lot more consultation, a lot more discussion, lots more development of policies, and we're going to listen to people clearly, and we're going to try and implement something that is it sort of meets as much as we possibly can meets everyone's sort of needs. So let's start talking a little bit about what they are. So the first main one is, and again, we sort of think back to that 2011. The first one is around inspection reform, and really what's being proposed is to really just enact that commitment from industry. So industry have committed that there'll be full uptake of the 2011 reforms, where we've moved from government meat inspectors to company meat inspectors or third-party meat inspectors, and the uptake was only around 50%. So there's commitment now from the industry that that will then be progressed. So establishments that are currently using government meat inspectors will look to transition over to AAOs, the Australian Government Authorised Officers. So the actual level of detail about how that works and how it will impact on establishments and how it will be implemented is being worked through right now as we speak. So there's currently a policy being sort of drafted, and that's being subject to discussion between that working group and at some point in the future, in the next sort of month or so, that will probably go out for broader consultation. There is a bit of a time frame on this one. This is probably the one where people are keen to sort of get this up and going next year. So the talk at the moment is that this will start to take shape around sort of March of next year, and sort of run with about a 6-month sort of time frame to transition. So I guess if that plays out the way that people are thinking, then come sort of September next year, we should be seeing all of our export abattoirs utilising AAOs where market sort of access allows us. I mean, clearly we've got a market in the US which must mandates that you have to have a government meat inspector, an FSMA, a food safety meat assessor, on the line, assessing carcasses or inspecting carcasses. So look, we're not anticipating that's going to change. That's the US have made it pretty clear over the years that that's an enshrined requirement that they have. And we're certainly not looking to change that. So abattoirs that are US listed will clearly have to have an FSMA on their chain, but where markets allow, the AAOs will be doing the post-mortem inspection. So that's the inspection reform. That's probably the main one, and which is probably the one that gets everyone's attention, I guess. But so we'll be looking to do that next year. Another one that we'll be doing, which hopefully will impact on people's sort of costs and how much material can be recovered, is our post-mortem inspection disposition reform. So if you've been around for the last couple of years, you'd be aware that there's been quite a number of research projects undertaken where fundamentally what the researchers have been looking at is are the post-mortem inspection procedures relevant to our disease status? Are they necessary? Are they actually there to detect pathology or disease that is actually likely to exist in Australia? And also with the dispositions, the dispositions that are currently in the Australian standard, are they relevant in terms of their ability to ensure that only suitable product is actually safe for human consumption? So there's lots of research being done, sort of funded by various groups, and a lot of that research has been published and accepted. And there's been a list of post-mortem inspection reforms or changes sort of made and changes some to dispositions. So that's currently being implemented in the domestic sort of system as we speak, actually. So I think they started this year. All of the state authorities looked at that research, and there's a group called the Australian Meat Regulators Group that met and decided that the research was sound, and then these changes could be made. And in the domestic sector, those changes have been implemented now under the various state sort of jurisdictions. Unfortunately, and I think I mentioned this at the last webinar, so things move slowly, but unfortunately in export, it wasn't as simple for us just to change that straight away, because our legislation sort of locked us into strict compliance with the current version of the Australian standard. And the current version of the Australian standard sort of requires all these inspection procedures to be done and the dispositions to be applied. So what has happened though, there's been a bit of a breakthrough recently, in that there's been an agreement for Standards Australia to access the content of the Australian standard and take, I guess, for lack of a better word, take ownership of that standard and be the group that sort of governs the management of that standard. Not so much the content, because that content will still be done by sort of the regulatory sort of agencies. But Standards Australia has been given will be given the license to make amendments to the standard, and I guess what the importance of that is that we get to keep the name. We get to keep the name of the Australian standard that we know and love, and importantly, our overseas trading partners know that. So it's a really good sell point for us in export to be able to say the meat's been produced in accordance with the Australian standards. So what we eat in Australia is what we're exporting. So it was really, like, it sounds a bit sort of precious, but it was really important to enshrine the actual title of that standard in export, so we didn't then have to sort of go around and sort of explain to all our trading partners that this new document that contains all these new inspection procedures is exactly the same as the Australian standards. So what's happened is Standards Australia will do that. They will now embark on a process of amending the standard to include these new inspection procedures. Once that's done, we will then go out to market to our trading partners and explain to them the changes that we've made. And look, we're not really anticipating any country to say, no, you can't do that, because the vast majority of these changes are already being done overseas anyway. So we'll be hopefully in a position sometime next year. Not too sure of the time frame, but sometime next year we'll be able to implement these new sort of changes. Why is this under the reform agenda? Well, fundamentally, the money that's been made available in the budget actually then funds our activity to make some of this stuff happen. So that's coming our way. Audits, what we're looking to do and what's being proposed is that currently we've got 2 audit systems. You can elect to have a monthly audit from your area technical manager, or you can have a 6-monthly sort of systems audit with 2 area technical managers. What we're fundamentally looking to doing is transitioning those establishments on the monthly audits over to the 6-monthly audit program. This was something we intended to do right when we started the 6-monthly audits, but again, I guess it wasn't sort of implemented fully back in around 2013-14. So this time around we're looking to revisit that, and I guess what we're wanting to see is that the continual sort of uptake by the industry of responsibility for managing their approved arrangements, and not sort of relying too heavily on the department to sort of come in and sort of be that sort of that quasi sort of manager of the approved arrangement. So and that then enables us to then sort of further enshrine our role as one of verifiers, and then that probably has sort of flow-on benefits for how we approach our audit program. What we are thinking of doing, I guess one of the lessons we've learned out of COVID is you can do a remote audit. They work. We can get onto things like Microsoft Teams or other platforms. iLeader is a good little electronic platform that we can sort of access and review documents. So we can do remote audits, and we're thinking that going forward they will continue to be part of normal part and parcel of how we do our audit program. The exact nature of how that sort of going to play out is not yet sort of clear, but we are sort of engaged in a few projects looking at various technology platforms to be able to sort of one of them's around providing live feeds of what's actually happening inside a slaughter floor. It's got a few sort of IT issues at the moment, but those types of technologies is what we're looking to utilise and sort of further enhance our capacity under a remote audit sort of a process. So look, we're thinking around sort of when does this occur? Well, obviously we've got to talk to a few people first, and there'll be a few establishments out there that may be a little bit sort of nervous around that sort of change. So look, we'll be out in contact and sort of listening and having a chat around what we want to do. But we're thinking at this stage, we might sort of start looking to kick that off around sort of September next year. So we've got probably a fair bit of time to go to sort of consult a little bit more broadly about how this is going to work. So that's one thing that we're going to think of doing. The other thing, just in that audit space too, I guess there's across the industry, I guess we've got a broad, a spectrum of establishments, and I guess you've got establishments that are sort of fairly heavily resourced and sort of their systems run very smoothly, and there's not a lot of sort of issues, and versus other establishments that seem to have sort of issues more frequently and probably more significant type sort of issues. So what we're looking to do is to acknowledge that, and those establishments which we feel through history have a high sort of compliance record, so very few rejections overseas, good audit results, sort of customer audits are working quite well. Those types of establishments, micro data is telling us everything's great. Those types of establishments we'll be looking to move those to possibly an annual audit. There's probably a little bit of work that we need to be doing though before we get to that point, and one of it's around the sort of the data capture that we've currently got, because what we're mindful is if we start sort of entertaining an annual audit sort of process, I mean that's a fair time between sort of visits that from the ATMs, and for the ATMs to sort of eyeball what's actually happening on plant. So what we're keen to do is actually supplement that information with some real sort of smart data sort of capture and data analytics. So what exactly that looks like, I don't know just yet, but it won't be as simple as we've passed a few audits and therefore we're all on annual audits. What we want to see is if we're not going to be there sort of every 6 months, and we want to have some sort of information flowing through to us in real time. It enables us to sort of keep our finger on the pulse about exactly what's happening at establishments at sort of points in time, to then give ourselves confidence that even under an annual audit program, as a regulator and as a certifier of the products, we can be continue to have confidence that compliance is being achieved, and it's being achieved consistently, so we can continue to certify. So that's probably in terms of the auditing, that's probably a little bit further down the track. We'll probably look to do that 6-monthly transition first, and then cast our attention to this one. Market access prioritisation framework. So there's been clearly the number one sort of priority for everyone in export is to be able to sell your products overseas, and you can only do that if you've got markets open. Fortunately, right now we've got about 176 markets open to us. We don't service all those markets, but we've got quite a lot of opportunities and potential to do that. But what we do see from time to time is priorities amongst the industry vary in terms of one establishment might be very keen to sell a certain product to a certain market, and that might not necessarily align with other priorities. So we find ourselves sometimes in a little bit of a quandary about, well, where do we start first with some of these market access priorities? So what we're going to do is work with industry and develop a framework around how do we actually prioritise what sort of activities the department, and when I say the department, I'm specifically referring to our trade sort of people, our export standards people that do a lot of these overseas sort of consultations and negotiations. Let's develop a framework about how do we sort of approach market access issues where we've got sort of maybe a number of parties with all different priorities. How do we then assign sort of our resources appropriately to ensure that that we're going to get the most bang for our buck? So there's no point trying to get sort of spending a year trying to get market access for a product for one establishment into a market when no one else really cares about it. But if we've got 50 establishments all wanting to sell product to a certain market, well, clearly that then dictates where your priorities. But we just need to sort of get that down on paper and make sure everyone's comfortable with that. How we do that. One of the other sort of key points of that is to enshrine in our market access negotiations the concept that You know, when we're doing negotiations with overseas countries, our start point and really possibly our finish point is compliance with the Australian standard. So, you know, what we do in Australia domestically is what we want to do for export, and we want to get our trading partners to accept that, with the view to hopefully, if we can promote that Australian standard and be confident that it's going to deliver the food safety and product integrity outcomes that everyone sort of is looking for, then we can avoid these situations where, you know, we have various sort of specific requirements that we have to, you know, implement when we're producing for certain countries. So we know that adds cost of business. We know that that's not the most efficient way to do business. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to do it, but what we want to do is enshrine in sort of a framework. You know, how do we sort of approach these consultations going forward? And I should say, like, you know, most of that is really just putting, you know, a document around, you know, pretty much the approach that happens now. Species testing. Look, I mean, I think, you know, we do a lot of species testing. You know, those that maybe not so much at abattoirs, but those that sort of involved with cold stores, independent cold stores, would probably be sick and tired of, you know, how many species tests we do over a year. But what we are looking to do, it actually is quite a costly program to run, and so we're looking to sort of, you know, explore our possibilities of how we actually can modify this program. You know, and well, I guess one of the suggestions is that we looked for, you know, like a lot of things that we've done over the years, is transfer the actual responsibility to conduct this type of verification back to industry, with a department sort of oversighting on top of that. So that's a concept that's not different from a lot of things that we've done, like be it micro testing or you know, even post-mortem inspection to a certain degree. But this is all sort of, you know, a bit of a brainstorming idea. I think no one's really sort of sat down and thought too much what this one looks like, but it is on the sort of the radar. So we'll have a bit more to think about that in the new year. One of the big things, you know, when I talked about that sort of over that $222 million that have been sort of, you know, allocated in the budget around digital services. So one of the big activities that's happening in the Meat Modernisation Working Group is the development of a digital roadmap. So a consultancy firm has been brought in and developed you know, a bit of a 5-year plan, and looked to put it in simple terms. It's about building, you know, smart IT systems that talk to each other, that capture, you know, sort of relevant data. They analyse that data, you know, and produce a meaningful, you know, sort of outcome that helps industry, helps regulators, helps establishments, helps trading partners, you know, get a good understanding of what's actually happening out there. Are we compliant? Do we have some areas we need to improve? You know, so it's about sort of transforming the way that we're actually doing business into the digital age, and trying to get some really good analytics sitting over the top of that, to then become smarter about how we do our business, smarter regulators, you know, smarter systems on plant to, you know, ensure that, you know, we can continue to produce product that's meeting requirements consistently, and if we're not, we're going to find out about it really super fast, and we're going to be able to do something about that. So you know, sort of if we get that right, and this is a bit of a big picture sort of, you know, project, but if we get that right, we can certainly see, you know, the possibilities of that then leading to maybe you know, reductions in regulatory presence. You know, maybe we don't have to turn up as often, maybe we don't have to turn up at all. Who knows what the world looks like going forward? But these are some of the things that we're thinking of. It will also then, you know, if we can get this right, and I'm really confident we will. If we've got some smart systems, you know, it's just going to make it so much easier when we go into these sort of these negotiations with overseas markets around, you know, sort of getting them to focus in on what's important. You know, the science behind food safety, the science behind sort of, you know, animal diseases, and you know, what's actually important, you know, in terms of the allowing product to flow into their country. So if we've got the data that sort of backs up those arguments, we should be able to see, you know, that translate into sort of more successful outcomes, and hopefully less, you know, requirements that basically just take cost out of this, you know, put cost into the system, I should say. So some of the things, like, you know, we're thinking obviously, you know, really just enhancing our communication between establishments, industry, and us. You know, this concept of having a portal, you know, where real-time data. So, you know, what we're sort of, you know, thinking is, you might be on the field floor doing an MHA assessment of, and, you know, you're entering that into your tablet device, and as soon as you hit submit, that then sort of gets sent to the department. You know, that type of thing, and you know, where we start seeing sort of, you know, deviations, you know, your systems would be built to say, yep, no, we had a problem here, we looked into it, we found out what was going on, we fixed it. All of that information then gets sort of automatically sent up to us, and we just run our eye over and go, look, that's fantastic. You had an issue, you found it, you fixed it. It's all under control now. We move on. So those types of sort of communications in real time, around food safety and product integrity is what we're sort of looking at. I guess for my expression here, medic on steroids. Currently, we've got a database. I'm not sure how many people are actually interacting with this database. There are some good things in medic right now that you can get out of it in terms of performance over time and some nice graphs and all that sort of stuff. But I'm not convinced that people are actually accessing it as much as they should. But what we're looking to do is really enhance that capability of medic, and is it called medic going forward? I'm not too sure, but there'll certainly be some sort of digital platform that will capture all of this and then sort of be hopefully being able to be utilised by you guys and us to make smart decisions about where our sort of pressure points are, where do we need to put our resources, when can we step back and just let things sort of happen and not get too heavily involved. So that's sort of exciting. A couple of other things I think I mentioned, a little bit about remote auditing, so there is some, so these smart glasses, and there'd be a few on this call that are probably, involved in some of these projects. I know AMPC are sort of running a project now around sort of smart glasses and how do we use this sort of, video streaming technology and potentially augmented reality where you have computer assisted sort of, decision making around that. So we're certainly, in that space, and we're involved in some of those projects looking at that. And what we want to do is, like I said before, sort of have these sort of feedback loops going into our trading partners. So an example would be, sort of China and Korea sort of, notify us, quite frequently around sort of, issues around labelling and maybe discrepancies of health certificates. If we can somehow, maybe capture data and feed that back into their systems in some sort of format, be it, how often I'm not too sure, but then at least give them some confidence that they have a bit of a window into what's actually happening in Australia. I know that's, possibly, a little bit sort of, new worldish and may not eventuate, but that's kind of the, sort of the thinking at the moment is how can we harness this technology and what benefits can we utilize it? And I guess one of the obvious ones would be, and this will probably happen sooner rather than later, will be, just the introduction or at least the uptake of the electronic meat transfer certificates and moving away from paper-based forms wherever we can. So just watch this space a little bit about the NTCs, because I think there'll be some things coming out probably in the next couple of months around that. Other reforms, some of the other things that we're thinking of on the agenda will be, a couple of years ago there was a research project. Again, this was sort of run by AMPC, funded by AMPC, where we were looking fundamentally at the micro testing that we do right now on carcasses and our old sort of ECM program, our national sort of carcass biological monitoring program. So the researchers looked at what we currently do and said, look, the data's saying everything's pretty clean, and made some recommendations about how we could change it. And one of the changes was a reduction in the number of tests that have to be taken on carcasses, but an increase in tests on sort of offal and primal products. So there was a bit of a give and take. So that was presented to us, I think, possibly start of last year. Unfortunately, we sort of ran out of money and we couldn't progress any of these. So we sort of put all of that on hold, but now the budget's sort of come through and we're working our way through this cost recovery. So some money's been made available, and this is back on the agenda. So currently right now there's some the finishing touches to some equivalency submissions are being made. It'll go to our major trading partners like the US and the EU, and we'll just float these, by them, and hopefully they can say, yep, no, that's all good, and then we can start, sort of implementing those changes. And that will be fundamentally a reduction in how many samples you're taking out of carcasses, but the program will require, some sampling of primal cartons and offal cartons. But we'll also change the alert systems on these, so what the trigger points for corrective action will hopefully be a little bit more meaningful. So when we are getting sort of the system telling us that there may be an issue, when we go look for it, we're more than likely going to find, yeah, there is actually a problem here. There's a deviation from what the process should be. So we'll be able to actually get you guys to be aware of that and fix that. So that's kind of one of the other benefits. Pre-arrangement amendment process streamlined. This sounds fairly straightforward, but still to this day, I think there's quite a few sort of people sort of getting a bit frustrated with you know the process of trying to get an approved arrangement amended, even if that amendment is quite sort of trivial. It sort of gets backlogged, you know, with the vet or the ATM or whatever the issue is. So what we're looking to do is just really streamline that, and fundamentally it's enacting what's currently allowed in legislation, but we probably don't really do that well, and that's you know only really requiring those significant variations to the approved arrangement to go through the prior approval process. Everything else can, you know, if it's minor and trivial, it's not really going to impact on any sort of food safety issue or you know market access issue or product integrity issue. Then, you know, go ahead, implement them, you know. And then, you know, when we roll through doing an audit, we'll assess those during audit. So we'll look at that. Water potability. Currently, we've still got a system where we're testing water every month. And I guess, you know, historically, if you look back 20, 30 years, when there was probably a hell of a lot more establishments, you know, sourcing water out of rivers or dams or bores or whatever, that, you know, probably a necessary sort of frequency. But the reality is now most of our establishments are on town water. So, you know, the water that's being used is exactly the same as the water that's being drunk in that local area. So, and we know that supply is tested, you know, a lot by everyone that's drinking that water. So, and everyone's got an interest in that. So we're looking at, you know, making changes to the frequency of our water testing to basically just remove a little bit of cost out of that. You know, that will be relying on a few trading partners. I know the EU are pretty keen to sort of have a monthly system. So we might not be able to, you know, have much there, but certainly other markets, we might be able to move away from that monthly, and maybe a quarterly test might be where we end up. And trade description and alteration. So again, it's probably, I'm not too sure how many people on the call get involved in sort of making, you know, sort of changes to trade descriptions, or, you know, sort of chilled to frozen type sort of changes on end panels of boxes, but it is quite cumbersome, takes up a lot of people's time. So we're looking to basically, you know, change that process where, you know, establishments that you know have approved arrangements where they clearly state how they're going to do this and you know, what checks and balances are in place, will approve those, and it'll hopefully remove the need to get, you know, case by case, you know, sort of approvals to do these types of things. So that's what's coming our way. So that's basically it for the reform. So I've sort of banged on a fair bit about that. I might just pause, and I can't actually see any questions, so I'm just going to pause and ask Matt if there are any questions from the group at this point in time before I start talking about refrigeration.
I certainly do have a couple of questions. There's one that I'll hold over to the end because it's more around markets, but first one, Alistair Baker, I think he's from Greenhams, has asked a question, but unfortunately he's no longer on, but it may be something other people in the audience would like to know. For a small one inspector US shed, will the department still undertake full inspection with one inspector, or will the company be expected to provide an AAO as well?
Yeah, look, I kind of anticipate that question. I kind of anticipate my answer. Look, I don't know. That level of detail is still being discussed. So that policy around the inspection and how it looks, and I guess the impact on exactly, you know, those types of establishments, which I know, you know, sort of Alistair's got a keen interest in. That's yet to be decided. There needs to be a little bit more consultation. I mean, the only thing I can say with certainty is there will be one FSMA on the chain at all US listed establishments. Beyond that, I'd be reluctant to sort of make a statement here that you know might sort of, you know, get people confused. So look, unfortunately, I can't answer his question in categorical terms, but I think it's just a matter of continuing to just watch this space a bit, and certainly, you know, the people, you know, the working group are dealing with that issue, you know, as we speak.
Yep, perfect. The next question I was going to ask, I believe I've received a second comment from this person saying that in your explanation that you've already covered it off. So that's really good about your thoroughness of talking through it. And I think it was around that that audit frequency and how do you know that things are being complied with outside of that. And you talked roughly around sort of smart data collection and those kinds of things. So I think we've got that one covered off. The next one is from Chris Robinson. Will the current EMSAP system audits remain at 2.5 days? At the beginning, it was only a recommendation for the 2.5 days time frame, but has basically been locked in as the time frame from the start. So what's the feedback around that one?
Yeah, look, we probably haven't really sort of, you know, cast our mind to the actual sort of, you know, 2.5 days. I would think that everything's sort of up for grabs a little bit in terms of what our audits look like going forward. Clearly, with the introduction of remote auditing, that changes just the nature of what we do and how we do it. So I guess the fundamental principle that we've always operated to, and I guess it just seems to translate to 2.5 days, is that the audit takes as long as the audit takes. I guess if we've got auditors out there that completing audits less than 2.5 days, then great, fantastic. If there are auditors out there that takes more than 2.5 days, well then so be it. I mean, what we do like to see is a legitimate reason for that, and they're not just sort of dragging the chain a bit. But in answers to Chris's question, no, look, we haven't really thought too much around that 2.5 days. I would suggest that with the streamlining of data capture and looking at sort of some of these things outside of the audit as indicators of performance, we would have to then be considering how do we utilize that information in the context of the greater sort of certification system, and where can we continue to deliver cost savings to the industry. So if that results in a reduction of 2.5 days, great. But yet to be thought through. I mean, we're fundamentally talking about systems that are just, I guess, sort of in people's sort of brains at the moment, and they are rapidly being translated onto paper and worked through in business cases and all that sort of stuff. And that's happening right now. But until we sort of get a little bit more clarity around what it is we can actually achieve with some of this data improvement and digital technologies, I think we just need to hold fire a little bit about changing sort of audit processes at the moment.
Yeah, at the moment, I guess, Jason, it's a bit of a beast, and there are bits that are, and to go further, is there are a bit of a moving feast, and they'll develop as they develop, and that's the message I get from it. And obviously there'll be a great amount of consultation between industry and the department, as you've said, to ensure that happens.
Yep, absolutely.
Fantastic. That's what I've got at the moment. I've got another market access question. We'll wait until you've talked around that. Hold on, I have another couple that have just popped up. Have any issues arisen from the implementation of the post-mortem and disposition changes in the domestic sector?
Not that I'm aware of.
And this one's from Andy.
That's
from Andy Poynton, so I suppose he has a vested interest in asking that question.
No, I think Andy, I can safely say that there has been no issues whatsoever that I'm aware of. I certainly haven't been bombarded with news headlines in the last 6 months that people are eating abscesses or funny pathology things that they didn't eat before. So no, I think we're tracking quite well, and it's actually a really good body of evidence that we can then sort of use with our trading partners as well to say, look, I mean, these changes that we're making are exactly what we've made in the domestic system. We're eating this product. We're 100% confident that the food safety is being sort of assured, just like it was in the past. So thank you, Andy, for that question.
Alistair Baker's back on again. I hope you heard your answer to his first question, but he's got a question, and we'll make this the last one for this series so we can actually get through everything. We haven't got much time left. Will you look at using annual AusMeat audits, so the North American McDonald's, for example, to remove some of the more basic functions out of the EMSAP audits, such as pest control, animal welfare, and I suppose other supporting systems?
I think the short answer is yes, we'll consider it, but it won't be limited to AusMeat audits. It'll be sort of looking at what information is out there around performance of an establishment that we as a regulator could potentially use to therefore one, inform our sort of systems better, and if that then has the flow on of sort of reducing sort of our regulatory presence or our approach and modifying that, then absolutely. I think the important thing is that everything's up for discussion and consideration. I think that's probably a fairly sort of good one that's been kicking around for a while in terms of the duplication of auditing, be it commercial or regulatory. I mean, HACCP is passive, pest control is pest control. So why do we everyone that wants to do an audit wants to look at the same thing? And I appreciate the frustrations that has on plant, where you sort of get asked the same question 5 times a month, Groundhog Day, all that sort of stuff. So look, I think it's, Alistair, it's definitely going to be, on the people's, radar, and will be considered. Exactly what that looks like, I think we just got to have a bit more of a think about that, and how do we utilise some of that stuff. But I do know internationally, there is a bit of a work, a bit of a movement going on around how regulators can utilise sort of commercial sort of systems more in terms of providing assurance around, some of the key food safety issues.
I'll say to I suppose bolster that is, watch this space. AMPC are potentially looking at things that may assist you or even commercial audits. So it's something that I'll have to chat to you outside of this, Jason.
Excellent.
Yeah, moving on. I suppose let's move to the meat notices.
Yeah, look, we'll get through this pretty quickly, and that's okay, because hopefully RIs are something that you guys are all across. But just since we last spoke, we've had 3 new notices. One was around China, and that was really just on the back of some of the suspensions and some of the issues that China sort of, raised to justify those suspensions, mostly labelling. And when we looked into that, I guess it was fair to say there are a few establishments that probably had an awareness of issues, but really hadn't followed the sort of content of the old notice, and it sort of notified people and sort of followed that up. So we really just wanted to issue that notice and just reinforce to everyone the importance that if you are getting feedback from customers or exporters that you've sold product to, that it's landed in China and there's been an issue, can you please, tell us, so we can all get on the front foot and sort of look at that, and then be a little bit more proactive in terms of what we go back to China with. So that's that one. Sister Circus Ovis. So we've had a sort of a position in export for many years around the disposition of carcasses affected with Sister Circus Ovis. So basically the rule was that if you had 5 or less cysts, you had to bone that carcass. You couldn't send it in boneless form. So we basically changed that. We've removed that to align the disposition with the Australian standard. We sort of, I guess, historically, no one could really sort of justify maintaining that requirement any longer. So we've removed that, and I guess, to Andy's point, hopefully we don't find a whole bunch of Ovis overseas. I'm pretty sure we won't. And then the last one that we've published is just the Refrigeration Index. And again, this one's been kicking around for a while. I guess, RI came in back in 2005 with the new legislation, so it's been around for a long time. And I guess at the time, if you were around at the time, there was lots of information about the RI, what it was, how it was to be applied. But over the years, that seems to have been, sort of lost and forgotten. And I guess, there was it was relayed to me that a lot of our auditors were sort of asking for this, that, and the other around RI. But then when we tried to refer to some sort of document to provide guidance to, there really one didn't exist for the industry. Unless you sort of, you kept, what was probably, sort of, sent out, sort of 20 years ago sort of thing. So look, the industry, to their credit, got together, I think it was mostly sort of MLA. I'm not too sure, Matt, if AMPC were involved, they probably were. But then some department people, industry people got together over the last sort of year or so. I think possibly Christine Robinson might have also been on that, and developed this fantastic guideline, which has sort of then come to us as the department. And we've looked at it and said, that looks pretty fantastic. Let's put this out there and provide that clarity and that guidance to establishments and to our auditors around what do we actually want to see in the RI. So that's primarily what this notice does. It asks you to review that guideline and review it in the light of your approved arrangement at your establishment, and make the mostly around, I guess, the verification sort of aspects of RI. If you're not quite hitting the mark as per that guideline, then make the amendment and get those approved, and then start implementing your data logging, your RI calculations in accordance with the guideline. So in that guideline, it gives you some markers around what the validation needs to be and what the ongoing verification needs to be. It also gives you some information around how you can utilise RI and the benefits of using sort of RI in refrigeration breakdowns. And a lot of that information was previously in our micro manual on ELMA, but we've sort of put it in here now. So look, I thought I'd just spend really quickly just sort of recap, and I've only really got 5 minutes, so this is going to be super fast. But so RI's in the legislation, and fundamentally the RI, we still have to comply with the refrigeration requirements in the Australian standard, your 7 in 24 or whatever it may be. But the RI has the benefit of not only can you have a system compliant with the parameters of the Australian standard, But the RI will then also tell you, was the application of that refrigeration effective in potentially controlling bacterial growth? So this is to avoid situations where, an example might be you've got hot offal into a carton, it sits outside for 10 hours, and then you whack it in your plate freezer and you chill it and freeze it really, really quickly. Yes, you absolutely hit the Australian standard parameter, compliant. But the reality is, you've left it out and it's been hot for a while. You've probably actually, encouraged some bacterial growth. Whereas the RI will actually then tell you whether or not you've got an issue with that. So that's I guess, the benefit of the RI. Predicts generic E. coli model. It doesn't tell you exactly how many bugs are on there. It's a mathematical model. It just predicts, doesn't give you an actual count. It is valid. The one that we use is absolutely valid, internationally recognised. It uses some inputs that are set, like water activity and pH and lactic acid, which all influence bacterial growth. In the model, they're actually set, but they're set at a level which is realistic, but also at a level which more than likely favours bacterial growth. So effectively, the RI gives you a little bit of a worst case scenario, so it's quite conservative. So and then what you put into it is obviously the time and the temperature sort of data that you collect from your data loggers. One important thing to note is the RI will stop calculating as soon as product gets below 7 degrees. So occasionally I stumble across people being told they have to do an RI of product in store, frozen product that's sitting at -18. No, you don't. You don't. It's pointless. You only have to do RIs where you've got product that's above 7 degrees, so hot product coming off the kiln floor, and the application of refrigeration to get below 7 and keeping it below 7. Okay, so the typical processes that we want to see it used for is your carcass chilling and freezing, your offal chilling and freezing, warm and hot boning cartons, be those primals or bulk pack. And offsite, sort of freezing programs too, where product may only get a short period in a refrigerated chamber before it's put on a truck and then sent to a cold store for further freezing or chilling. Those types of products, where they're above 7 degrees before they go out, we want to see some RIs into those as well. So validation, you use RI to validate when you're starting up a refrigeration process, and for you guys out there, that's probably not that common, but maybe you're developing a new product, or you've built a new chiller or a new freezer, or maybe you've changed the dimensions of your cartons or whatever. So you've got a new process there. What we want to see is use your RIs, put your data loggers in your product, and present that information under a validation study. And what we're looking for there, and what the guideline talks about there, is a minimum of 30. Okay, I think probably people are sort of familiar with that concept of 30, but we want to see a minimum of 30 data sets to then sort of go into your application to your ATM for approval of that process. Okay. Verification. So once we validate it, it's up and going. This is probably the area where there was a bit of tension between auditors and establishments around the ongoing use of data loggers and calculations of RIs. So what the guideline has now done is hopefully provided clarity around what the expectations are. So we want to see RIs done regularly, and within the guideline, this is what it says. It says 1 carcass chiller profile a month. So we want to see a data logger in a carcass at least once a month. In boning rooms, again, we want the same, for each type of product that you're producing, be that a bulk pack product or a primal product, chilled or frozen, we want to see at least 1 data logger a month in each one of those products. And just remember, when you're doing your boning room product, so these carcasses have already had a little bit of, sort of the RI calculation in the carcass chiller. So just remember that when you get a boning room product and you've calculated the RI, you just need to add that to your carcass RI value too, to get an overall sort of refrigeration sort of chain sort of result. Hot boning, if you're out there doing hot boning, we want to see at least 1 data logger, 1 RI calculation every day. And then over the course of a week, we want you to try and cover off different products. So one Monday you might do a bulk pack frozen, Tuesday you might do a primal chilled, Wednesday you might do a primal frozen, and so on. So over the period of a week, you've sort of captured the various sort of products that you've got there in your processes. And then for offal, we want to see at least sort of 1 offal carton done, a chilled carton and a frozen carton being done every month. And what we, the guidelines saying is try and target your products that cool the slowest. So you sort of, if you got the big sort of hot tripes going in, you might want to do those, because that they're going to be sort of take a lot longer to get down to 7 than maybe a kidney. Refrigeration breakdown. So in the back end of that guideline, there's some good information around refrigeration breakdowns and how to utilise RIs and what type of information you really should try and collect to help make a disposition of potentially affected product. I guess the take-home message is use data loggers as much as you possibly can around temperature, breakdowns, because if we can get enough information out of those data loggers and the RIs, we can avoid having to sort of undertake that expensive micro testing. So take-home message there: data loggers, data loggers, data loggers. You may not only use them only once a year, but if you have to use them, hopefully it'll save you a bit of money in terms of micro sort of testing. So that was that. I'm going to just whip through these just to bring everyone's attention. If you're not already aware, we've had a little bit of a spate of some US rejections, all on small stock lamb and mutton, all for zero tolerance defects. I saw some of the photos coming back out of the States around what the defects were. Fair to say they're small. They're small, your traditional sort of specks of flecks of ingesta, little black specks of feces. So, we could probably people on first glance would probably say, oh, well, that's clearly not ZTs. Well, to be honest, it probably really doesn't matter that much, because we sort of know that the US will determine anything that remotely looks like it could be, a zero tolerance defect feces ingester is exactly what they'll call it at import, and that seems to be what's happened here. So look, just a shout out to everyone. Please, if you're packing small stock product in the States, triple check it. Make sure it's super clean. If you're not doing sort of daily sort of checks on this product, then you really should be, and try and keep it as clean, because the more rejections we get, the more pressure the US puts on us around our systems, and the more likely they are to request us to introduce new requirements, and we don't want to do that if we can avoid it. And Korea, just one that sort of happened in the last sort of 12 months, and a few of you may be aware of this too. Korea is a bit of a market for beef intestines. So unfortunately, we've sent some beef intestines. A few establishments sent beef intestines, and they've gotten into the marketplace and sort of been opened up, and they're full of, guess what, feces and ingesta. So they look pretty terrible. It hit the media over there. The Korean government was a little bit embarrassed. So the Korean government now sort of come back to us and said, look, not good enough, really need to do better. So we're currently working with the Koreans, and some of you would have been involved with a bit of a survey around how clean are our intestines. Generally, they're pretty clean. The Koreans, though, are sort of amping up the pressure a bit, to the point where we really do need to make sure that the intestines, internally and externally, probably more externally now, are free of any sort of obvious contamination, because it's likely that if we continue to send these types of intestines to Korea, they'll get rejected, and potentially we may end up losing market. So look, it was just to bring that to everyone's attention. If you're out there doing beef intestines to Korea and you're not down checking them, please start checking them. I know it's not part of the MHA. We exempt this type of product from MHA, so you don't have to do it. But I would seriously encourage everyone, if you're doing this type of product, get down there in that sort of intestine room and start checking your product. That was about it for me, so I'm going to wrap up there. I purposely didn't put anything about China, because China is just China, and yeah, I don't know what to tell people about China other than just let's cross our fingers and hope we keep sending products to China. Matt, over to you. If Matt's there, have I lost everyone?
Matt, are you online? Okay, so I'll just start until Matt's ready, Jason. So a question has come through saying, is there a chance that the photos from rejections can be sent around to industry so that they can use it for training of staff?
The photos are all owned by the establishments themselves, so I don't have any capacity to do that. Possibly that might be something that, I don't know if any AMIC person's online, they might be able to do that.
Okay, thanks. That the person that asked the question can follow up with AMIC to see if that's possible.
But I mean, fair to say, like, I mean, if you've seen sort of, pictures of carcasses that have got, like, sort of specks, not obvious smears or anything like that, but specks. That's.
Sorry, everyone. We're just having some technical difficulties with microphones. Sorry, Jason, you should be back on.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Look, I don't know what you heard, but I was just saying, look, the photos that I've seen basically just show, specks, sort of yellow specks, black specks, you know, sort of scattered specks, no real obvious sort of pellets or smears or, you know, large stains of ingesta, nothing super obvious, which there'd be everyone would go, oh no, that's definitely ZT. It's sort of a lot of these defects are, you know, I think they are ZTs. I think I'm not sort of, you know, saying the US have got it wrong. I think they are ZTs, but it just sort of reminds us that the level of product hygiene going into the States just needs to be, effectively the product needs to be spotless. That's the take-home message when I look at photos like that.
Thank you. Matt, I think you're back online. Do you want to continue asking the questions?
Yeah, I'm back on. There's one right from the very start, and it's a market access question. It is from Devon in the UK. Are there any so you're going viral, Jason? Are there likely to be any changes post-Brexit with the UK, and would there be any specific measures relevant to the UK for market access?
Look, a little bit out of my area of expertise, because that's really an area of our export standards branch. So unfortunately, Devon, I can't give you any sort of great insight or answer your question with any great accuracy. I'm aware that there are currently, you know, discussions going on with the UK authorities around what the import requirements will be going forward. And I think there's, you know, probably on our side, we're looking at, you know, possibly, you know, if we no longer have to meet some of those EU requirements, then what's our capacity for the UK to accept, you know, possibly something different? But beyond that, Devon, I really don't know. I would think from our side, we'd be looking to explore the possibilities to maybe wind back some of the more stringent EU requirements that we have to meet when we send product there, if the UK are going to be comfortable with that. But yeah, I don't know the full sort of scale of what's actually happening there.
We'd start with the Australian standard from your.
Absolutely.
Now, so I've got another one here on market access. This is from Campbell Ferris from Hillside. Market access. What can we expect market access approvals to be ready with the department? So the Vietnam's, South Africa, Malaysia. That may be specific to Hillside, but I'm not sure. So.
I'm not 100% sure I followed the question, Matt. What was it again?
I'll read it verbatim, right? Market access. What can we expect market access approvals already with the department? So what ones that are sitting there with you for Vietnam, South Africa, Malaysia, etc.?
Okay, so I'll start with South Africa first, because I wasn't aware that we actually had any approval for South Africa in place. So I'm happy to take that question offline, but my understanding is there is no specific listing requirement that we have to wait for the South Africans to give us approval. I think there's possibly something internally we need to do, but there's nothing that needs to go to South Africa as far as I know. Vietnam, a whole bunch of Vietnam approvals have just come through in the last couple of weeks, which is really good. Not too sure where that establishment, you know, if they've got an application in, where that's actually at, but there's been some long-standing applications. I think applications that have been with Vietnamese authorities for over 12 months, possibly longer, have finally been approved, and that's been sort of notified in the last couple of weeks. So that's been a really good outcome. But you know, just, you know, if you've got a Vietnamese application in the system, you just have to be patient. I mean, they get through us pretty quick. They get overseas, you know, sort of Vietnam pretty quick, but then we just really have to play the waiting game. And I know Vietnam over the last couple of years, they've had a few agency changes, which has complicated the process. And Malaysia, again, unfortunately, Malaysia is one of these countries where the only way you can get approved for export to Malaysia is by having an on-site audit from the Malaysian Department of Veterinary Services and their halal body, JARCM. Clearly, with COVID and the travel restrictions, there's no sort of you know, way that we can get them on site. We have discussed with them, as we have discussed with others like Indonesia, the possibility of having some sort of remote audit inspection. But I don't think those conversations have progressed to the point of anything, you know, sort of, you know, meaningful. Certainly no acceptance on Malaysia's side that that will be how they go forward. So unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do about that at this point.
Okay, I'm not sure if this question's been asked, but Lisa McClary has asked about the requirements. We have a question in regards to the requirements for deep butt temperatures for warm bone carcasses. The guideline states warm boning is between 20 to 25 degrees. Is this a requirement?
No, so it's not a regulatory requirement. There's not a regulatory requirement. The regulatory requirement is that the way that you process your meat, whatever which way you want to do it, it meets the requirements of the refrigeration index criteria. Okay, so I think the references to warm boning and hot boning are a little bit more historic, and it sort of does provide a differentiation between your traditional hot boning, where it's pretty much straight off the kill floor at maybe about 35 degrees, into the boning room, and warm boning, where you might keep it in the chiller for a few hours and then sort of ship it to the boning room, and so it's down a little bit. So it provides, I guess, a little bit of some terminology so people can actually understand what type of process we're talking about. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if it's a hot bone product or a warm bone product. What we want to see is that product's above 7. We want to get it down to 7 in a manner that will meet the refrigeration criteria. So it's not, there's no, in answer to the question, there is no regulatory requirement that sort of says this is warm boning, and if you want to do warm boning, you must ensure that the carcass temperature, deep butt, is in between 20 and 25. There is no requirement of that nature.
All right, I think that's all we've got. We have run slightly over time. Jason, I thank you for your staying back with us, and I think we've exhausted everybody from questions, which is good. But of course, if there are any further questions that you have of any of the things that were in today's session, I think finally give myself or Amanda drop us a line, and we can get you in touch with the appropriate people, or even probably fill up Jason's inbox. I'm sure he's happy for that. But yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to present with us today, Jason.
No, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. And I'll just say, like I said at the start, this reform agenda, it's the start of the journey. I think, like all things that are new, we have a tendency to maybe get a little bit worried about what the future looks like. But I think this one is right at the start. So I think some exciting things are going to be happening over the next couple of years, and I think we're going to be in a really good spot when we get some of these things up and going. So I'm excited. Hopefully you guys are too, and hopefully COVID goes away and we can start getting out and about again. And I look forward to catching up with you sort of face to face when we can.
Great, thanks Jason and Matt for today's very informative session, and you got lots of questions, which was really good. Just want to thank everyone for joining today. It's really good to see that these are being broadcasted from the east coast to the west and the north to the south by having a look at the attendance list, so it's really good to be able to have a national approach for this. Just to let everyone know, the next webinar coming up is actually going to be a little bit different. It's going to be an in-house one for AMPC members only. We're going to actually change it where it's going to be a kitchen roundtable session, and it's going to be around COVID, so people will be actually able to ask questions. We're going to have some presentation from Respond Global, Dr. Ian Norton, for those that were on the last COVID update. He will be joining us to give us a global update and a national update. We're going to have AMIC coming in to talk about an industry update, and then AMPC have got 4 projects that are currently going through our system at the moment around COVID. So we would like to give the membership an update of what those projects are, what they look like, and how you may be able to participate. So that's on the Tuesday the 24th at 2 p.m. New South Wales time. So thanks everyone again, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.